Okay, so it is 5 p.m. I think we'll get started. Whoops. Hide myself and we'll get going. Okay, good evening and welcome to July's History Room Live. My name is Mary Kay Kwasnik and I'm the Archivist and Special Collections Librarian at the Patent-Free Library in Bath, Maine. History Room Live is a monthly program out of the Sagadahoc History and Genealogy Room at the Patent-Free Library, and we do our best to bring you monthly speakers, primary sources, and workshops that aim to highlight the history of Maine and our communities. Tonight, I'm really excited to talk to you about postcards. We'll talk a little bit about the general history of postcards as we know them today, learn about how to date a postcard, and we'll look at a few of our History Room postcard collections. My presentation will last about 45 minutes with some time for questions. And then for folks who are here, which is Joe, you are welcome to look at these tables with our postcard collections and take a reproduction postcard home. Hello, welcome. For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, you may not be able to see these collection items themselves, but I'll be showing a lot of scans of postcards in my presentation, and you're always welcome to come into the history room and see those collections for yourself. This is a Zoom webinar, so you're not able to turn on your camera or your mic, but please feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. I will note I am not a postcard expert or even a postcard collector, just a curious neighborhood archivist who has been looking into these collections. So I might not be able to answer your questions, but we'll see. Maybe Joe can answer. And it's just me tonight. I don't have a tech backup, so it might be a little tough for me to keep an eye on your questions while I'm in screen share, but I will do my best. So bear with me. Let me just make sure, is this an old question? Okay, I don't know how to, okay, I'll keep an eye on it. So let's get started. Oops. Okay. There we go. Okay, perfect. So first things first, what are we talking about when we talk about postcards? What are the pieces of a postcard that we all know? So let's start with the image side. Here we have an image of the old Morse High School in Bath, probably from around 1927. You could substitute Morse for Acadia National Park or Times Square or even the Grand Canyon, but we're used to seeing an image that takes up either the whole card or maybe a composite image of a few photographs. Essentially, this side is really one of the big reasons that we're sending a card. Look at this place, look at where I've been. Sometimes there's a description like we see at the bottom of the card where it says Morse High School, Bath, Maine, or sometimes it's incorporated into a bigger title and fully featured into the design. So then let's flip that card over. On the back side, we have two distinct spaces. One side is for writing our message. Maybe like the title of today's program, we're writing "Wish You Were Here." And then on the other side is the recipient's address. Once we mail that card, we have to attach a stamp. And once it enters the mail system, of course, it gets that postmark. This postcard is postmarked 1927, but it's still welcome. But it's still really similar to postcards that we see today. It hasn't changed too much. Okay, so now that our memories are refreshed and we're all talking about the same thing, let's go back to where it all started. So pre-postcards, we're gonna go back to about the 1860s. Before postcards started flowing through the mail, people just sent regular mail. Cards or letters could be put into envelopes with postage attached, and these were typically referred to as mailed cards, or at least that's how they refer to it in a lot of the books that I've been reading about the history of the postcard. Sometimes mailed cards were sent through the mail in envelopes with pictures on them. The photo on the right is not from that time period, but it's kind of similar to what those would have looked like, and it's from the Smithsonian Institution archives. Some people speculate that these illustrated envelopes are the direct ancestor of today's postcard. Okay, so in 1861, we see the first copyright for a cardboard card that gets sent through the mail envelope list. And what's interesting is that at this point, there's really no link to tourism or even really message writing. What we see here is that it's pretty tied to advertising. So J.P. Charlton and publisher H.L. Lippman of Philadelphia copyright their postal card called the Lippmann postal card. The front, where we would expect an image, was blank, and the back is totally taken up by 3 lines for the address and a stamp box. And the cards read, this postal card offers, or they read, copyright secured 1861, Lippmann's postal card, patent applied for. So you better not steal their idea. One of these surviving cards that I was able to find online, you can really see what they're getting at with the advertising idea. And it reads at the top, this postal card offers great facilities for sending messages or for rapid correspondence. And at the time, they were sold in bulk. That's really how they sold them. You could buy 1,000 cards for $3.75. So even just the way they were selling them hinted at that capacity for mass mailing. Okay, so then in the next decade, the US government jumps into the game and they get into the postcard business. The US government first started selling postal cards in May of 1873, and they could be purchased at the post office by businesses to print cheap advertising messages, or now by an individual to send cheap, simple messages to friends and family. So just like the one that we saw previously, they're totally blank on one side, like we see down here, and then the other side is explicitly for that address. So this one that we're looking at here is from 1874. And this one is an example of it being used to send a quick message to friends and family, because this is a little personal message. And this one is from the University of North Florida Special Collections. So at this point, even though the government had gotten into it, private companies could still print postal cards and sell them, but they were more expensive. So to send a government postal card was 1 cent, but a private mailing card would have been 2 cents. It was twice as expensive. So they weren't that popular at that point. So next, we start to kind of see what we're more used to seeing. We start to see what are called souvenir cards. And this is the first time that we're starting to see images on the cards rather than a blank backside. And these images are really showcasing different places that you might visit or that you might just be interested in. They were primarily printed on a small local scale by either a local printing company for a tourist site or by that tourist site themselves. But a few large companies began to copyright location-based view cards, like the American Souvenir Card Company. And these seemingly were really intended for collectors because they were primarily sold by mail in sets of 10. So very different than the smaller ones that you might see when you're visiting Mount Washington or something like that. These cards generally depicted several views of a city or a location, and some companies even branched out to do topic-based cards, like cards based on Shakespeare or Abraham Lincoln. And this one is from the Souvenir Card Collectors Society. Okay, so next we move on to private mailing cards. So in 1898, things really changed, and the US government authorizes the production and mailing of private mailing cards. So this act allowed those private companies to continue to sell their cards, but they evened the playing field and you could send them for a mere 1 cent, just like the government cards. But a few things went with this act. So it stipulated that the cards had to read private mailing card, which you see up here, which distinguishes those private ones from government cards. And then they also cite the Act of Congress right under it. Also on this side, there's always some variation of the words, this side is for the address, or this side is exclusively for the address, but they had to say that. And then on the front of the postal card, if it did not contain an image, the sender could write a message there, but we start to see images there. Sometimes they took up the whole card, but often it would just be part of the card and there would be a space left for you to write your message. So this one that I have up, it's an example of a private mailing card that we have in the history room, and it's from the Oscar Marsh postcard collection, which we will look at a lot more in depth in a couple of slides. So on the back side, we see that it's postmarked 1905, and it was sent to Miss Marion L. Murray of East Boothbay, Maine. And then on the back side, we see a small image of the Sagadahoc County Courthouse and the Soldiers Monument. And then there's lots of space to write that message. The message reads, December 21st, 1905. My dear Miss Murray, I thank you very much for the notes you sent me. You may send the notes either to here or Boston, whichever is more convenient for you. Again, thanking you for your kindness. I'm yours very sincerely, E. Marion Freeman. And then this is just a bigger look at it. Okay, so from here, once that act of Congress goes through, the door is wide open for postcard manufacturers. We start to see many, many, many more companies pop up, and postcards are super easily available for consumers. And very shortly after this, in the early 20th century, postcard collecting becomes a really popular pastime, almost instantly. At this time, most postcards are lithographs of vacation destinations, but as the collector demand grows, manufacturers start to add cards with all sorts of other topics like holiday greetings or silly cartoons. And it's really just a way to appeal to people who aren't necessarily traveling, because you could just go into a store and buy postcards. And at this point, most cards, even though they were sold by American companies, they were being printed in Germany. From what I understand, Germany had far superior lithography technology than the United States did at that time. Then the first reproductions of photographs that we start to see really pop up around 1900, like we saw in the previous slide. They were mostly reprinted versions of historic photographs rather than photographs taken exclusively for the purpose of being printed on a postcard. However, I love this. Just like any new craze, we see a kind of intellectual backlash to postcard collecting and postcard mailing. In the June 1910 issue of American Magazine, a piece on postcards reads, "Like a heaven-sent relief, the souvenir postal card has come to the man of few ideas and a torpid vocabulary. No invention in recent years has been so gratefully received to the thousands of weary travelers ransacking their poorly stocked garrets for words with to transmit the wonders they are seeing to the folks at home. The first one general gasp of relief. See for yourself, I can't describe it." And there was no question of its success. So just like email or Instagram or TikTok, people saw postcards as the downfall of our intellectual and social skills. But I think we're doing okay. Okay, so here is another big development in the postcard. So by 1901, we have some new government regulations. The government calls for cards to now read postcard instead of private mailing card. So that's when we start to really see that term being popularly used. And in addition, in 1907, the United States starts permitting postcards to have a divided back, which means that we have that line down the middle and people are allowed to start writing messages on that back side. This is when we start to see that. So here we just have a postcard, still with those 3 lines for the address, no message, but some fun doodles. And then here we see that newer version. So then the next phase of the postcard is called the white border era. From 1915 to 1930, essentially beginning with World War I, postcard images start to be printed with this crisp white border around the edge as a way to save ink during the war. During this period also, postcards start being printed much, much more domestically in the United States, or they're being imported from England rather than Germany. And then the next period that's commonly referred to is the linen postcard. Between 1930 and 1944, postcards were printed on a linen fabric paper stock. There's something about the linen that enabled the postcards to be printed with really brightly colored and highly saturated ink. And that's very indicative of linen paper stock. And then on this slide, I've enlarged it so you can kind of see the texture of the paper. They're very distinctive and you can really see the weaving. And then the next and last phase, which really does bring us up to today's postcard, is the photochrome era. From 1939 to today, most photo postcards are still printed under the photochrome process. And I really can't explain it. I don't understand how it works. But it looks just like a photograph, but under a magnifying glass, you would be able to see a distinctive dot pattern in how it's printed and reproduced. Also in 1939, postcards could start to be found in service stations, which is one place that I always think of finding postcards. And the size of the postcard grew from 3.5 by 5 inches to 4 by 6, which is what now most postcards are. I chose this image because it's a great example of a much more contemporary postcard from 1976. It's of the old Sewell House on Washington Street, and it's also, interestingly, the former home of the Bath Marine Museum, and it's for sale right now, so you can find it on Zillow, and it's really something. Okay, so for anybody who might have a postcard collection at home or wants to start one, or maybe you just have an old postcard, here's some fun ways to date it. And there are all sorts of guides like this online if you are interested. So the very first thing to look at is, does your card have the words private mailing card authorized by an act of Congress, May 19th, 1898 on the back? If yes, it probably dates from 1893 to 1901. If not, keep going. Is the address side divided? So do we see that vertical line? Yes. Okay, keep going. But if not, it's probably printed before 1907. Does it indicate that it was printed in Germany? If yes, probably before 1915. If not, keep going. Is there a white border around the image? Yes. Then it was probably printed between 1915 and 1930. If not, keep going. Is the postcard paper woven like fabric? If yes, probably printed between 1930 and 1944. And lastly, does the postcard have a shiny finish with a color photo? If yes, then it was probably printed after 1945. If not, go back to start, or maybe you don't have a postcard, I don't know. Okay, so before I move on and talk about some, hi Brenda, and talk about some of our postcard collections, I just want to ask if anybody has any questions. And I've hidden the Zoom controls, so I'm going to escape quickly. No questions on Zoom yet. Any questions in person or comments?
So what about the real photo postcard?
So I was going to ask.
What about, that's probably now. Everything that I've looked at continues to refer to now as the photochrome era. So I don't really know.
Back from 1910.
Okay, then 1910 probably it is.
It's saying the chat is disabled.
Oh,
that.
I fixed it.
Oh,
I fixed
okay.
it. How do I?
That might be why you're not getting it.
Okay, I'm gonna dismiss. It is fixed. It should be fixed. And we have the Q&A.
Oh.
Okay, and I'm gonna move forward, and I'll periodically go back to the chat and Q&A. Okay, so let's dive in. I'm going to highlight 3 history room collections in this slideshow, but I have some more of those set out here. I have all of them set out, and then I have a few others set out. So at the end of the program, folks will have plenty of time to look through them and take home some postcards. And if you're joining us on Zoom, you can always come visit me. You can come look at the archives at any time, no appointment necessary. Okay, so the first collection that I'm going to talk about is the Oscar Marsh postcard collection. This collection was donated to the History Room in 2010, and Oscar Marsh was a longtime Bath resident and avid stamp and postcard collector. This collection consists of 2 large binders of postcards divided by subject by the collector. So we haven't altered anything in the collection. It's just as he organized it. And I just love this one. This is one that I had scanned for our bulletin board. I had to include it here. So the first one that I've chosen is a really good example of a private mailing card from that pre-postcard era. We see the address on one side, and then the picture side is really an advertisement for the Ransom B. Fuller of the steamship Ransom B. Fuller of the Eastern Steamship Co. It reads, "To Bath, Booth Bay, and the 100 Islands of the Sheepscot Bay." We also have a sticker that was added that is celebrating the 300th anniversary of American shipping in Bath, August 5th through 10th, 1907. This card is also tricky to date because there's no postmark, and it might have even been hand delivered. And then this sticker has been added. But I believe that the postcard itself was printed earlier, given that it's a private mailing card. And remember that private mailing cards would have been printed sometime between 1898 and 1901. After 1901, they read postcard rather than private mailing card. Here is another fun one. So here we have a postcard, which we know must have been printed after 1901, and it's still not a divided back, so probably printed between 1901 and 1907, even though it's postmarked 1909. It's hard to see, but it's postmarked 1909. However, this one isn't showing off a vacation spot like so many of the cards that we'll talk about and look at. It's instead advertising for the store John J. Desmond Co. on Center Street and Water Streets. So it's unclear if this was a mailer sent out by the business or if maybe someone grabbed it and then sent it out to a friend, but it's a really good example of early postcards being used as mailers for businesses. Okay, next up, we see some of the real bread and butter of the Oscar Marsh postcard collection, which is Scenes of Bath. This collection has tons and tons of images of Front Street and Center Street, plus notable buildings, historic homes, and so many more images from around the city. Here I chose an image that I just love so much of Front Street, looking north from the intersection of Front and Center Streets. We can see some really well-known historic businesses. We can see Thompson's, which is right here with that red and white awning. And then the store right next to it is Hallett's. That's currently House of Logan and then Island Treasure Toys for those who need to be oriented. And then across the street, we see the Colonial Cafe, which I think now that's Bath Savings. Is that right?
That's the,
Operation.
it's the operations center. It's the Bank of America used to be there.
Okay, the Operations
First
Center.
National Bank, well,
Okay, First National Bank of Portland. Our records indicate that based on these businesses, this image probably dates to around 1910. And I just love it because we see some really early cars, we see horse-drawn carriages, streetcar tracks, and just so many people out on the street. It really just harkens back to a totally different time. And I've printed two. So I'm sure you can tell one of them does not have that white background. They're the same image, but definitely printed at different times. Same.
clouds.
And then, oh yeah, the clouds are a little bit different. I hadn't noticed that before. And I think that's probably because at this point they were hand colored. So people would add little embellishments like that.
And one of the, you can see the old lettering on the right-hand side on the brick, but on the left one, it's all red. Yes,
Like up here.
yes, it's there's shaded letters.
Yeah, definitely. So someone, for folks on Zoom, if you didn't hear, someone noted that on the one on the right-hand side, you can kind of see faded letters on the brick, but here not so much. So it's just interesting, two of the same photograph, definitely reproduced in different ways.
So are those by the same publisher?
Oh, that's a good question.
Or, I see this kind of thing a lot. There's
Mhm.
numerous versions of the same image of, or basically the same image of the old Y.
Yeah. So I'll have to
And I
check.
can't tell if that's like different eras of I mean,
Yeah.
It's often like this, different eras of postcards,
Yeah.
but the same.
The same image, but different. Yeah, that's a good question. And we could look at the card. The next slide is the back of it, so we can see. I didn't notice when I was scanning them, but we can definitely look. So let's look at the backs. So we see that they're both divided back postcards. The one on the left, I think the publisher might be CT Photochrome, and then the one on the right is CT American Art. I don't know if that's different iterations of the same company or not. So it very well could be one earlier version of their postcard and then the same company printing the one later. So here, if we want to kind of date them, noticing the things that we've noticed, you might notice that both are divided back postcards. So they're definitely both post 1907. And only one has a postmark with a visible year. So the one on the right has, which is the one with the white border, it was mailed in 1921, which that fits with that white border idea that it would have been after 1915. And then the one on the left, you know, there's really no way to know with that postcard kind of looking different, but it was probably printed a lot earlier, given that it doesn't have that white border. I'm just going to pull up the chat. It looks like some folks.
Space for writing messages on the left, upper left.
I'm sorry.
On upper left, it says this space for writing messages.
And sometimes they still say that.
Yeah.
Darius on Zoom, I will do better to repeat the questions and comments from the live audience. And from Tim on real photo postcards, which was Joe's question, Kodak invented it in 1903. You can tell the difference between a lithographed or other print type and RPPCs because the real photos don't have the dot pattern under magnification. Awesome. Thank you, Tim. Okay. He's on it. Okay. There we go. Okay. Oops. Okay, so here are some other views of other notable Bath buildings in that same collection. On the left, we have an image of the Customs House and Post Office. Our records indicate that it was probably taken around 1905, and the postmark is Waldoboro, 1907. And I just love this super simple message on the right-hand side, written vertically. The message reads, I received your postcard and I was pleased of it. So I just love that, short and sweet and to the point. On the right, we have the Sagada Hawk House. This building doesn't stand anymore, but does anybody know where it was? You know. It was at the corner of Front and Center. Yeah, so if you are at Cafe Creme looking across Center Street, it's right there where House of Logan is. So the Sagada Hawk House was a huge hotel built by the Patton family, and it ran from about 1849 to 1894 when it was destroyed in a fire. This postcard, the Sagada Hawk House, it's unused. So we don't know exactly when it was sent, but our records indicate that this was probably printed around 1910, but the image was probably taken around 1890. So just a few years before it burned in the fire. Like the Sagada Hawk House, we see lots of images of hotels and other tourist experiences in these postcard collections, which totally makes sense because postcards largely derived from tourism and the tourist industry. And also this is a beautiful area. It draws people from all over the world. So here is another image that directly ties to tourism, which is the Hotel Phoenix in Bath. The Hotel Phoenix was located at 716 Washington Street. From about 1806, it wasn't the Hotel Phoenix at that point. I believe it was called Bath Hotel. And then I don't know when it went away. Does anybody know?
Early 60s.
Joe says the early 60s is when it went away.
Well, fire.
But from a fire. Thanks, Joe. So this is kind of like across from VIW. And at the time, it would have been a really beautiful river adjacent destination. And I actually found a newspaper clipping. I'm not sure if it was the Bath Daily Times or the Bath Independent, but I found a clipping in one of our vertical files that noted that wealthy families would stay there while their yachts were being worked on at the shipyards. And one notable guest was JP Morgan. So kind of interesting. This card in particular is postmarked August 8th, 1909, and it reads, "Here just for a day, lovely sail down last night, back tonight." So definitely someone on a trip, maybe staying at the Hotel Phoenix. And one thing that I'll also point out is that there is some information on the left-hand side of the card, which isn't always there about the printer. It reads the Hugh C. Layton Co-Manufacturers, Portland, Maine, but it also reads made in Germany, like so many postcards before 1915. I love this one. I just think it's so beautiful. It really is. It's an unused postcard. It's white bordered, so probably printed after 1915. And the images of the main central ferry boat, Fernandino Gorges, by moonlight in Bath. That's the caption. It's unused, but I did scan the back because someone jotted down some notes on the back. It reads the name of the ship and some stats of the ship, like the breadth and the depth. And according to,
So VIW built it?
yes, they did. So according to Ralph L. Snow's Bath Iron Works, the first 100 years, the contract with BIW for the Ferdinando Gorges was signed in July of 1908, and it was delivered in May of 1909. It was a modern steel specialized vessel that could hold 9 passenger train cars or 15 freight cars on 3 sets of tracks. So this boat worked the Kennebec River daily until the opening of the Carleton Bridge to railway traffic in 1927, which made this ferry redundant. But I just can't even imagine a train getting onto a ferry boat to go across. I just think it's really amazing. Here's another example of postcards really illustrating the tourist and travel experience. This one shows us the Maine Central Railroad station in Bath. It's postmarked 1913 to Mrs. James L. Dean in Waterville, Maine. The author writes, "Dear Mrs. D, I miss you people at Winslow, and I often wish you were all down here. The people here are very nice to us, and we like. Mr. Flood likes his work very much. How are the children? Mr. F sends regards to all. With love, Maud Flood." And then here's another great one. This one shows us the steamer Virginia of the Popham Line at City Landing, Bath. It's postmarked 1915, but I think it was printed earlier because there's no white border. And we see here it's addressed to Mrs. Seth A. Capron of Westfield, Mass. She writes, or they write, oh no, it's Helene. "Dear old friend, I'm still in Maine and will write you a long letter soon with all the news. Hope you will not go without your bandage too much. With love to all, Helene." So I hope she was okay and she didn't go without her bandage too much. I just think these steamships they're so fascinating, and they probably need to be their own program someday. But I just think it's so interesting how before traveling by car was the standard, steamships enabled people to come up here. They could travel super easily and quickly up the coast by boat. A lot of these steamships came from Boston, bringing tourists or business people up the Maine coast. And lots of steamers also went up the river, like the Kennebec as well. And this also calls to a time before really big bridges were around, like the Carleton Bridge, because people had to take ferries and steamers to cross those bodies of water. This one in particular was on the Popham Line, and it would have brought people out to Popham. And other steamers brought people out to Georgetown, Booth Bay Harbor, plenty of other places. And then,
Can I ask a question? So I'm asking a joke, because I think the only one knows.
I'll repeat it.
Okay. Is the city landing at that point in time the bottom of Broad Street?
So the question was the city landing at that time at the bottom of Broad Street? And Joe says yes. Okay. So here's the last one that I chose to share from the Oscar Marsh postcard collection because I just think it's super sweet. It's a postcard from the 1989 centennial of the Patent-Free Library, and on the back has been handwritten all of the postcard components that we now know because it was blank. And that Mr. Marsh would have known too as a postcard collector. So the author has penned in postcard, he's penned in this space for writing messages, this space for address only, and the stamp box. And he writes in July 1989, "Dear Oscar, didn't know if you had one of these. Postally used. Might be a rarity someday, maybe in 2089. Got this yesterday in the library. 6 cards for $5 to support the library. John M." And now it's in our collection. So I just love that. So the next collection that I'm going to talk about is the Patricia E. Bonner collection. This is a huge collection with lots and lots of varied formats of items, and it focuses largely on mid-coast Maine, specifically Bath, Phippsburg, Georgetown, Wiscasset, West Bath, and Arousic. Materials range from souvenir china and glass bottles, postcards and trade cards, steamship time schedules, broadsides, and photographs and personal correspondence. The collection is organized by resource type and then by topic. And there are 5 photo books of postcards and ephemera, a few of which I've pulled today, and you're welcome to look through. So like I said, the Bonner collection is absolutely gigantic. And some of those postcard books have many of the same images as are in the Oscar Marsh collection. So rather than show you those same types of images, I've picked ones that kind of go outside of Bath because we've talked so much about Bath. So like I said, these binders are organized by location and they're pretty sprawling. So I'm going to show you some of the other towns that are in this binder. So here we have one of about a dozen postcards of Woolwich. This one specifically is Days Ferry. So for folks who aren't local, Days Ferry is an area in Woolwich on the Kennebec River, parallel to the northernmost part of Bath. And it was a ferry crossing on the Kennebec until the 1870s. This message is really interesting because it's an example of someone using a postcard from home, not on a trip, to jot off a quick message rather than sending a letter. The postmark date isn't legible, but it was mailed from West Woolwich, and the message reads, "Dear Mommy, how are you? We have all been sick with distemper that has been going over the country. Jose has had a very bad throat trouble. He was over home yesterday. Why do you not write and tell me that you are numbered among the living? Is not this fine? Today my home you will look if you see. Lots of love, kind wishes." So totally different than some of the other messages we've been seeing. Here's another Woolwich view. This one is postmarked August 5th, 1912, Bath, Maine, and it reads, "Received your card, but haven't been able to puzzle out the name of the lake. I think this card exaggerates scenes in Woolwich, don't you? How are you? Too busy to visit Maine? Yours with love, Hazel." So here we keep driving through Woolwich down to Arousik. The postcard shows us the Arousik toll bridge from the Woolwich side.
The real photo postcard.
So Joe says this is a good example of a real photo postcard from that early 1910s period. The originating postmark is August 27th, 1915, Bath, Maine, and it's addressed to Miss L. Williams, Richmond, Maine. The message says, August 26th, 1915, "Dear Sadie, guess who will be here Saturday? Guess who will be here through Saturday? I will be up on the 25th. Went to Pictures in Vaudeville last night. The vaudeville was fine. May tonight. Wish you was here to go with me. Cheer up, it will soon be Saturday. Signed, WSH." And then here we have an image of the Doubling Point Lighthouse in Arousik. This one is unused and it has no postmark. There's not a white background, but it is black and white. So this could be pre-World War I, but to me, in my untrained eye, the font of the caption looks a little bit more mid-century. Yeah, maybe 40s. So not sure, but definitely really pretty, and I wanted to include it. And then from Arousik, we'll keep heading out to Georgetown and then down to Popham, and we look at the Sigwin light. I love these two images so much. In May, I did an outreach program at Georgetown Central School for pre-K through second graders, and I showed them some images of the area, and they loved these images. They immediately recognized the lighthouse, and then they loved this image on the right showing the kids in front of the lighthouse. So I just love it, these places that are so recognizable and something certainly to write home about. Both of these postcards are unused, so they don't have postmarks. And we're not sure based on our records when they date from, but I just think they're really beautiful. And it's hard to tell in the scan, but in the image on the right, the lighthouse has actually been outlined in glitter. Wow. So it's very festive. So then we will head down to Popham, a big tourist destination. Here we see an image of the Riverside Hotel at Popham Beach and the life-saving station. The postmark on the address side is Popham Beach, August 7th, 1908, and it's addressed to Captain F.E. Riley in Augusta, Maine. And the message reads, "Dear Pa, glad to get the cards. You didn't speak of your cold. Hope you are not sick. We're having a good time. ELS, Eminem." And then on the front, on the image, they've written "the sand upon which the boys play." So definitely writing home about a wonderful trip. This one is unused, so there's no fun message to read, but here we have a colorized image of Fort Popham with a Boston steamer going north up the Kennebec. And we have lots of images of the fort in the collection. Then of course we have to dip down the New Meadows River and take a look at West Bath. So here we have the famous New Meadows Inn on the New Meadows River. This collection has dozens of images of the New Meadows River. So many of the inn. So many, like what? And of the river, but so many of the inn. And it's really amazing. And I love this one so much. I specifically chose this one because of the caption and also the message. So the caption on the image side reads, "New Meadows Inn, New Meadows River, Maine, an excursion from Portland, just arrived to join the crowd that comes from near and far to enjoy the famous shore dinner served here." And then on the address side, the postmark is July 31st, 1916 in Bath, Maine. And it's addressed to George H. Wood of Boston, Mass. And it reads, "You may think Ogunquit is it, but I'll say this is the best place for a dinner ever. A wonderful ride, a wonderful dinner, a wonderful day. Try it sometime. Regards to Mrs. W from J. Eli." So that is quite a recommendation from both the caption and the message.
So that's a Graves postcard, Georgia Graves postcard, and they're very distinctive in their look
Mm-hmm.
and in their like captioning. There's a book about this book of just the postcard.
I did not know that. Thank you for sharing.
The West Park, from West Park, so it says on the corner of that card. And the
Mm-hmm.
local person,
So
there's a lot of postcards of these postal scenes, and they're all like, have that kind of.
that's very cool. So Brenda just noted that this is a George S. Graves postcard, who was a local postcard printer manufacturer from West Harpswell, and that his cards are very distinctive, both in terms of image and captioning. Is that okay? Awesome. Thank you, Brenda. Okay. The last one I'll show from this collection is a colorized postcard of the train station at the New Meadows Inn. It had its own staff, which I just think is so cool. The originating postmark is August 12th, 1915, South Harbor, Maine, to Miss Esther L. of Dorchester, Mass. The message is, the jammed car looked rather familiar. We hailed it with delight, HLH. So who knows, maybe she was from the Boston area and was used to these packed train cars. Okay, so the third and last collection that I'll talk about just briefly, and we do have it here, is really different. It's much, much smaller than the other two collections, but it's really sweet. And I chose it because it's very, very different. So the Ruth B. Wood postcard collection is one folder compared to these much larger collections. It's one folder of postcards collected by Ruth B. Mitchell. That was her name as a child. And then her married name was Ruth B. Wood. So they were collected by her when she was a child living in the north end of Bath at the beginning of the 20th century. And all of the postcards are genre postcards. So they're a really good example of the ways postcard manufacturers branched out from just travel scenes to appeal to a broader audience, and maybe people who weren't necessarily traveling. And they're all very silly and cute. They date from around 1904 to 1910. Ruth was the daughter of an iron worker, Fred M. Mitchell, and his wife, Carrie Wright, and they lived in the north end of Bath. These cards are mostly mailed from family members, and I just love that this little piece of a little girl is now in the history room. It was something that she kept her entire life and that her daughter then donated to the history room. So here we have a good example of a little Easter greeting, a little girl and her rooster, you know, just a way to appeal to more mainstream customers. This one is super silly. It is a donkey, and he's saying, "I'll talk if you pull my tail." And this scan, the tail's been pulled out, and it says, "Say, Jen, are my ears on straight?" I don't know what that means, but just super silly. And then this is the other side of it and how that pulley works. And then these ones are really funny too. They just, for me, they really remind me of the types of birthday cards I pick out for my nieces. So I love thinking about her relatives picking these out to mail to her and how excited she must have been getting them in the mail. So the card on the left shows one cat playing a mandolin or a banjo or some sort of stringed instrument, and then three other cats singing a sheet music. They're all on a roof. And the caption reads, "A daily concert," and then written horizontally on the side, it says, "I may be with you Saturday." And then this next one shows some sort of mischievous youth about to trip a man with a mustache and a straw hat, and it reads, "I'm going to take a trip." And then these are just the backs of the cards. They don't give us too much other than her name and the address. But I scanned them because the one on the left, the information at the top of the card, I think, is written in German. So that's really distinctive of when most cards were printed in Germany. And this may have even been a German company. I'm not sure. But I wanted to show that. It's a Postcards. But it likely harkens back to when postcards were largely printed in Germany. So those were a few of our postcards. Please visit us. Please reach out. This is my contact information. I'm going to get out of screen share so I can check the chat and Q&A. And before I do that, though, I just would like to invite everybody to come to the history room and see these collections, see these images. We probably have, I mean, we definitely have even more than this. This is just what I've pulled today. And I also want to thank everybody for joining us for July's History Room Live. I had so much fun learning about postcards this month. Next month, I'm really excited to have an author talk. We're thrilled to welcome author and Captain Eric Weiberg. He's going to be discussing his book, U-Boats in New England, and he's specifically going to be talking about U-boats off the coast of Maine during World War II. And that will be on Friday, August 26th at 11 a.m. And he'll also be here to sign and sell his books too. So I really invite everybody to join us at that.
August